Afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for attending the latest AI literacy event. So this is the fourth of 6 or 7 events that myself and Nadine will be organising. So we're going to be looking at EDI, copyright and legal implications of AI, exploring that in a little bit more detail. So I'm delighted that we've got Richard Walker, who's the Associate Director. I'm going to get this right, because he said the titles keep changing. So Associate Director of Digital Education within the university. And we've got Alice Bennett, who's in the Digital Accessibility Unit, and we've got Catt from the Open Research Team in the library, who are going to present on these issues for us. So thank you very much in advance for your time this afternoon. So just quickly before we get started, I'm just going to whiz through the kind of usual introductions. Just a reminder in terms of how, kind of what we're doing are the series of these workshops. So, there's lots of AI literacy frameworks that are available. Myself and Nadine have taken a particular interest in Hilia's work, 2023. And kind of Hilia outlines, if you like, a progression that we need to go on as educators if we're going to get to the point where we can effectively integrate AI into our teaching and learning practice. There's a number of building blocks that we're focusing on. So we looked at AI basics and for the first 2 workshops, and we're looking at particular issues for the next 3. So hopefully taking us to the point where we feel comfortable to be able to integrate AI into our everyday practice. So just a quick reminder about the workshop series. We're on workshop 4 of what will potentially be 7 in term. We'll finish off looking at kind of specific module design in workshop 6 and 7. We've got a tentative date of the 29th of April, which we haven't had before, for the 6th workshop. And we will extend that an extra week if we think there's more to cover. So it's kind of watch this space. Just a reminder that the next one after this is on the 28th of March, which is an external event where we are actually got employers in. The first half will be talking about integration of AI in teaching and learning, and the second half of the session will focus specifically on employers' perspectives. You should have an invite in your calendars, but please use the Eventbrite link to sign up to that one, because it is an external event. Just quickly then, final reminder, I think everyone here's been to numerous workshops, so it's part of CPD to support colleagues CPD, and we will be issuing a certificate to people who've attended more than 4 of the events, so that that you've got kind of a record of your attendance. And we are kind of committed to kind of continually improving these workshops and thinking about colleagues' needs. So there's a plea that if you haven't filled it in before, if you could fill in the workshop questionnaire. It's optional, it's online, but it'll help us design these events in the future. So thank you for that. Right, I'm going to hand over then to Richard, Alice and Ben, who know a lot more about this than me, so thank you very much. Are you mic'd up?
I'm mic'd up, so hopefully people can hear me. So first of all, thanks very much for the invitation for us to come and sort of share practice with you about EDI and copyright. Hopefully this will be the start of a conversation, and if you've got any sort of personal, individual sort of issues, you can follow up with us after today. So this is going to be a team offering with, I'm just going to give a bit of information about the university context, and then I'm going to hand over to Ben, who's going to talk about, I'm going to hand over to Alice first, who's going to talk about equity issues, and then Ben will go on to talk about copyright. And at each point we'll pause and take questions, so if there's anything that's unclear, please do raise those questions then. And at the end we'll hopefully have a sort of a wider discussion about your teaching context and any particular issues that have come up. So that is our menu for today. So we'll try and end up with a teaching discussion, as I say, at the end. Right, so what's the university's position? What's the institutional context? I think, Caroline, you said that Mike had given a little bit of information, hadn't he, about that previously. But in essence, the university, it signs up to the Russell Group principles, which are progressive in the sense that they encourage institutions to engage with AI, which is a positive thing, but with certain caveats that We need to sort of encourage staff and students to use our own supported tools rather than third party, and there are clear reasons for that, particularly around data security. And we do have a range of those, the obvious one being now the Google Suite and Gemini, but also we have a range of embedded services as well, where AI releases, tool releases, are becoming more common. So one that I'm very familiar with is Anthology Blackboard virtual learning environment, where the AI design assistant is now an embedded part of and a core part of the tool set. So encouraging staff, students to use those services because they've been through a data security process, and we know from an AI point of view that there's an educational sort of license behind their use, and our data isn't being used to train their models, their LLM models. So that's one aspect, is in a positive sense, use the tools that are centrally supported, develop AI literacy, and that applies as much to staff as it does to students in terms of their awareness of what AI is good for and the context in which it should be used. And think in particular about the ethical use of AI in learning, teaching and assessment. What is acceptable, what's not? And then crucially, be transparent in terms of where you're using AI and in what context. Oops, I'm going the wrong way again. Right. But I think the key points are whether you decide, I mean, AI now is a major paradigm shift in terms of learning technology. It's pervasive, it's out there. So you have a choice either to progressively design in AI into your teaching or your assessment, or to consciously try and prevent its use by designing out. So there are those two approaches. But whichever one you choose, you need to be absolutely sort of clear in terms of your communication to students about your expectations, particularly around generative AI, which is what we're going to be talking about today. How that is being used in learning and assessment tasks. And so therefore there should be a sort of a clear sort of dialogue. And I think, we're still in our formative stages here at the university in terms of an institutional sort of view on what's permissible for teaching and learning. And I think that is emerging still with the university's AI steering group still sort of moving towards a more directive picture. But we've seen this already in other institutions like Leeds University, where they have a traffic light system of where AI use is positively encouraged, which is green, to caveats, nuances around its use, which are amber, and then red, where it's absolutely banned for where activities assessment like knowledge recall are required, for instance. So I think that's where we will be shortly in terms of a clear institutional picture. But in the meantime, at a disciplinary level, it's up to us to be very clear and directive. So just to summarise then this institutional picture, in using and being progressive in our use of AI, we need to think about ethical issues. That should really underpin everything we do. So what Alice is going to be talking about shortly is around inclusion and equity and things to think about. We also need to be absolutely clear on data privacy and respect for copyright, which Ben's going to be talking about. And we need to be clear in terms of our communication to students around academic rigour and integrity. And that's one other aspect which I can sort of briefly mention. Our academic integrity tutorial is now being reviewed to embed AI as a part of that. It's had a sort of a radical impact on what we've been sort of teaching our students around academic integrity, so that needs to change. I think there's one other sort of bullet point which is missing, which you won't find on the university's Gen I teaching and learning page, which is also the sustainability perspective, which I think is a really important one. We talk generally about sort of green IT, but there hasn't been explicit reference to about the sustainability issues around AI. It shouldn't be used as a prop, something that is simply there to be used in every eventuality. I think there needs to be some criticality in terms of when we're using AI and for what purposes. So I think that sustainability issue probably needs to sort of be brought out more clearly in university guidance. That's certainly something I would argue. So that's the institutional picture. It's formative. I don't think we're quite there as other institutions are in terms of a sort of a top-down sort of clear picture on how AI should be used for teaching, learning, assessment, but that's the context we're currently working to. And I think, you know, we would commend you as a school for being on the front foot on this in terms of leading your own training and trying to get a sort of a clear way forward. Are there any questions about what I've said, or shall we move on?
Richard, I have a quick question about academic integrity. You're saying there is a new, there's a new program or a new module coming, is that?
Yeah, well, the whole package is being reviewed because clearly it's been sort of outdated with the arrival of AI. It doesn't really acknowledge that at all, and issues like false authorship, which we mention on the student guidance on the university page, but that's not reflected in the current sort of version of academic integrity, so it needs to be. So it's being reviewed and I think will be updated. I haven't got a timescale for when that work will be completed by. Okay. Right, well, I'll leave it there and I'll hand over now to Alice to talk about inclusion.
So, one of the things we're talking about today is the equality and equity. So I'm from the Digital Accessibility Unit. So most of my work around this has been looking at it through accessibility and the impact on disabled people, but it does go much wider than that. So a few of the things that Richard has said already are kind of worth mentioning here, although I haven't gone into huge detail on them. One is the sustainability, in that we know that this is disproportionately impacting people in the global south, and it's also disproportionate impact on disabled people in terms of climate crisis. That is one of the highest areas of fatality and casualty. So again, there are questions about, as a disabled person, do I want to inflict that on other disabled communities? There are questions there about sustainability. We're not going into that massively today, but it is something that is interesting, that none of this is looked at in terms of the green impact for the university, because it's not directly happening here. You can use things, but the impact is happening somewhere else, and that doesn't count. And as Richard said, that does need, I think, some kind of reconsideration. Some of the other things around this as well are around cost. So again, that emphasis on the ones that we know that are safe and secure, but also provided by the university, that requiring students to use things outside that, or saying that students can use it, but to use one of those is very much different to allowing people to go and purchase their own, or thinking about purchase licenses, because we very quickly end up in inequity there. One of the other things I also want to be clear about is that a lot of this is talking about generative AI today, because that's what we were asked to talk about. One thing I will say is that traditional AI, if we can call it traditional, the older stuff that is to do around speech recognition, things like that, is absolutely transformative for accessibility, and we use and recommend those tools all the time. What's sort of fundamentally different about a spell checker or about something that allows you to dictate is that it's facilitating. It's not creating something. It is enabling you to do that piece of writing with all your typos and spelling mistakes taken out. It's enabling you to type without needing to physically type, or for a screen reader to read something back to you so you don't need to read it yourself. But it is not coming up with anything. So that's the kind of fundamental difference. So this is focusing on the generative side of things. So one of the first things with this is that people have often promoted it a lot as an accessibility tool at the moment. And one thing I'll say, that working in accessibility right now, there has been a proliferation of these tools, and they're often really heavily marketed, often to people with ADHD and autism, often with SPLDs like dyslexia. These are products and they are being marketed. And it is interesting to look at some of the claims, because sometimes what they're offering is actually stuff that's available in other packages already, but it's being offered in a new and shiny way with AI, which is a bit of a buzzword. So I think I would encourage a little bit of caution around what some of these things are promising, because some of it, frankly, is a bit snake oil. It's promising a lot, and it is exploiting groups of people who want to be more productive, want to fit in better and things. And so there are some issues, I think, ethically around that. But anybody marketing a product is going to try and exploit markets. That's, you know that better than most. We are in the business school. But that is something to be aware of. But when you're pushing people to use these products, the reliability is a factor. So there's been some really interesting recent studies. I'm just going to highlight one of these, not going time today into that many. But a recent BBC one, they gave ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, and Perplexity, four of the really big hitters in this area, full access to the BBC website, and then prompted them with questions asking about news articles as sources. It's a really interesting study if you want to have a deeper look at that. 51% of the answers would just have significant accuracy issues. So at least half of it is not reliable. And of those, 19% are introducing factual errors that weren't in the articles, and 13% are making up quotes. Now, we have seen things, and you may well have seen this with student essays that have been submitted with generative AI, that it will make up studies, it will make up quotes, it will sometimes cite a real academic, but a fake article. Sometimes it makes the whole thing up. All sorts of things, it will just make things up because it's not actually giving you an answer. It looks like it's thinking, but it's giving you something that looks like an answer. It's looked at lots of answers and it's giving you something that looks like them. And so it will give you things that look like proper quotations. They aren't always. So again, there's a lot of factual errors here, which is going to mean that we're going to have to check things. So again, that puts us in a slightly different situation. I had a colleague who was using generative AI to generate bits of code. And he could then basically skim read it and go, yeah, that'll work, no, that won't. But he was an expert at doing that. Somebody starting out couldn't do that. You can't spot the mistakes. So if you are on an unfamiliar topic as a student and you do this because you think the computer is more reliable, we have an automation bias on this. We think computers are more reliable than people because they don't have biases, but they're learning off biased data and they're not thinking, they're giving us a thing that looks like an answer. So unless you're really interrogating that and looking and double checking, you're quite vulnerable if it's an area you don't know. And you're more vulnerable if you're working in a second language. And I know that's something that is a big consideration for this school because you have so many international students here, that it kind of is a shortcut in one way, but there's a lot of pitfalls and you are much more vulnerable to them if it's an unfamiliar topic and particularly if this is not your first language. So again, the checking of work potentially can actually create more work. So it's a shortcut, but you kind of need to know the landscape first. Yes?
Is there anything, I mean, you may go into this, but is there anything we can do then to sort of help students with that kind of issue? In particular with the English as a second language, and so they're not quite sure how to assess the quality of things? Is there anything that has come out that might be a recommendation about that?
I think encouraging criticality and encouraging them to engage with things. So you have DACs in this department, don't you, with a lot of kind of academic skill support, and we also have central academic skill support. Looking at that kind of thing, getting them to evaluate what they're doing and to think about it. And I think just talking about the fact that potentially half the time it might give you a wrong answer. And it's ultimately going to be their decision on their own device to use things or not. But I think making people aware of the dangers of that and getting them to think critically about it is really the best thing we can do at the moment around that. Unfortunately, sorry, there's no magic bullets in this. This is not a talk anyone wants to hear, really. And with that is the vulnerability. So potentially you're vulnerable to misinformation, but also you're potentially vulnerable with that piece of software. And this brings us back to, again, I'm not going into the huge security side of this, but Richard has mentioned those secure versions, and I'm sure that was what was covered in the first couple of sessions that you had about what's safe to use. Loads of these tools are not properly security or GDPR vetted. Again, this explosion of these tools and extensions, and they're trying to sell them to people and promising life-changing things. A lot of these do not meet security standards, and where are they storing the data and what are they doing with it? There's a lot of questions here. They don't meet EU standards, they don't meet UK standards. You're potentially vulnerable. If you put any personal data into these, I really, really wouldn't. But also, if you're using research data, what's the agreement you've got with your funder about that? If you are using interview data with participants, what are you doing with that? Ben's going to touch on this a bit more. But again, there are lots of aspects of our work that, you know, pushing people into this. If you're saying this is the accessible way for you to use this, is to use this bit of software, but that's an untried bit of software, and that's an unsecure bit of software, you're putting that person at stake. There's also an interesting thing, and it's not quite clear, but that kind of shadow following. So in the same way that if you go onto a certain platform, you might get a particular load of adverts. So I went through a phase where lots of my friends were getting married, so suddenly you see all these adverts for wedding dresses. So I'm not getting married, but it's worked out that I'm talking to people who are, that kind of thing. If I am asking some of these things questions about medical care, if I am asking them questions about my own Google history is probably dreadful with trying to work out how to sort out hospital appointments and things. But it's far more so if stuff is learning off it. And there is a concern about some of these systems being able to kind of identify disabled people kind of by what they're searching for, by what they're doing, and then building on, well, they're doing things like this and building up kind of profiles of different ethnic groups of people. Certainly disability has been looked at in this way. So again, there are questions about how you're using it and what it's learning about you and your individual characteristics. This is not yet resolved, but it is something that's not talked about very much, but it is an issue. And the bias is, we've got a bit of a bias in that we tend to assume the computer is dispassionate and it's going to come out with something completely neutral. Except it's learned off the internet, and we know that the internet is full of lots of things, many of them not particularly factual, and yeah, it's a problem. In terms of generative AI, there are some very specific problems around this with perpetuating bias. So one of those is around the large language models, which is the sort of primary one that we're using, and art generation tools. And now, a lot of this has been done around race, but it does seem to be doing it around all areas. I've chosen one of the sets of less offensive pictures around this, but there are various studies. So this is one word's difference. And so we've got child riding a red bicycle through a neighbourhood with blue and red houses. If we say that the child was black, the nature of the neighbourhood changes a lot. That's one word difference. And that's from 2024. So this is recent. And this is one of the less offensive studies around this in terms of the images that were generated. There was somewhere it was asking them to generate grandmothers from different cultures, and there were a lot of racial stereotypes, shall we say. So the fact that it's doing this, and it's doing this across ability, it's doing it across gender. There was a nuclear medicine thing, and somebody just tried to generate a picture for a conference thing, didn't think it was a big deal, and was horrified because it was a nurse and a doctor next to an MRI machine. All the nurses were very young women with ponytails, all the doctors were older men, everybody was white, because he'd not done a very structured prompt. So the fact that you can, I mean, Martin does prompt engineering classing, you can try and overcome this by being very specific with your prompting, but putting a generic prompt in will get you very strong biases. And this is not from when this started, this is relatively recent. And one of the other things is around AI supporting EDI. Now, this is something where a lot of the automated tools are brilliant, and I would absolutely recommend them. So we have automated accessibility checkers in Microsoft, they're built in. We've got Grackle Docs built in, well, we pay for the extension, that's kind of in your Google Workspace. These are automated checkers, and they're not a magic bullet, they do miss stuff sometimes, but it's a brilliant start point. And there are built-in AI generating things. Now those, I would say, are also more of a start point. So not saying don't use them, not that they're bad, but again, you need to check them. So this is an interesting example. And I didn't choose this. I had a file of geese photos that I used for various example teaching things, and it just decided they were sprinklers. It's not interpreted that as a fountain behind some geese. It says that they are a couple of geese sprinklers, which are, of course, a known thing, which I thought was quite interesting. That was the first one I pulled up, and that just happened. I was quite delighted with that as an example. And also Ben, I initially thought this was Henry Moore, not Austin Wright, so credit to Ben for me messing up my abstract sculptors. But the point is, why have I chosen that picture? Now, it might be because I want to talk about campus sculpture, and I think this is a nice framing. It might be because I want to advertise the campus, and this is just quite a nice picture. It might be because I'm talking about biodiversity on campus. So the fact that it's barnacle geese might be relevant, the fact that it's a nice bit of campus with different things on it might be relevant, the name of the sculpture and the fact there is a sculpture in that picture might be relevant. Why you chose that picture to illustrate something is important, and the computer doesn't know that. So it's a good place to start if you're not used to writing out text, or even image description. We've experimented with this for blind students, including a student in archaeology, with getting things to describe an object. Sometimes it's really good, and you just might want to tweak it a little bit, but you're always going to need that nuance of why you chose that. Is this a typical example? Is this an atypical example? Am I choosing it to illustrate the geese, the sculpture, the campus? What am I doing? So don't not use them, but don't assume that if you use them, it's going to necessarily give you what you want, or something that's meaningful for the user. Because the whole point of these is that it's meaningful for the user. And the AI-generated version isn't always. You can make it that. And again, if you're still getting into the habit of writing it, they're a really good start point. But again, it's that kind of uncritical relying on things that's the problem. And that also goes for captions. So I think we are probably being captioned both on Zoom and Panopto. Again, brilliant. It copes better with my voice now. One thing I will say for COVID is that it's improved voice recognition immensely, particularly for women's voices. Because it was all trained on men initially. So the accuracy between me and colleagues in recordings would vary on who was speaking. It's pretty good now. But you still want to have a look, because again, if you're using specialist terminology, if anyone's got a particularly strong regional accent, or sometimes it just comes out with something weird and we don't know why. So again, I'm a huge fan of the transcription feature in Zoom. You know, these are really good starting points, but you can't assume that if you have a deaf student that that transcription is going to be an accurate record. You will need to read through. And so the other one with that is that we have seen a bit of a thing where people are kind of just hoping for an AI magic bullet to take this away. You do need to engage with accessibility. These tools can help. The accessibility checkers are brilliant. Being able to use the transcription tools is great. But you do need to check. And we have a responsibility to make it accessible. We can't tell somebody to download something, and we can't rely on AI to do that. So it's really about inclusive design that makes it. They're there to help. They are tools, and they do help. But you know, they're not going to fix it. So essentially, it's things just to think about using them. And again, you know, they're here. We know students are using them. We just need to talk about it and talk about it sensibly. So, yep, don't try and sidestep from this. If you do have students who need different formats and things, talk to them about what they need, talk to them about what works. Do use the transcription, do use the captions. By all means, use image generation things, but think about how it's working and do check them, because you can't just assume it's going to work for it. With any digital tool, thinking about how accessible it is to all students, because we have seen people promote other digital tools that don't have keyboard shortcuts or don't work with a screen reader, and they haven't thought about alternatives. So again, we're not saying not to do stuff, but think about alternatives. Is this accessible to everybody? Is it secure? Because if you're asking students to download or access something with their data or create an account, that's something you should always ask. And the automation bias, the idea that if a computer generates it, it'll be more accessible than what you can do. But what you can do is more nuanced. So it's not going to be bias-free. So thinking about the biases, again, it's that critical thinking. And if you are going to choose to do things, I'd recommend going to the prompt sessions and things as well to think about how you're writing prompts, because we can start to counter or mitigate some of the biases with the prompt writing, but they are things we need to be aware of. So that's my quick run through EDI for today. I don't know if there are any questions. Yeah.
Some of my students particularly are Chinese, and they tend to use the more Chinese orientated apps and whatnot. How do we actually look at any other language apps, or does Gemini do it in different languages as in Chinese?
Most of these are available in different languages. However, there are different ones coming out of China. So DeepThink is the big one that's come out, which actually in some ways seems to be less problematic than some of the others, although that's kind of a debatable one. It's really difficult. Chinese software is very much linked to Chinese government access. So again,
thinking with the digital access and using university emails, for example, to log into DeepMind, is it secure? Should you allow us to do?
We can't necessarily stop them doing it.
Yeah.
One thing I would say, there's a difference between creating an account and allowing access. So if I create an account and I've used my university email address, maybe I should or shouldn't have done that. If I create an account and it asks, I need access to your emails and your Google Drive and other things, that's an absolute no. Right. If it wants access to any of your files or anything to do with your Google account, no. If it's just creating an account and you're effectively using the email as a login, that's not necessarily great, but it's not the same as the whole situation. Richard, yeah.
But I think for each formal activity, you should be directing them through the AI tools that we support.
Yes.
If they choose to do that in their own time, they're carrying that risk in terms of data security, etc. So I wouldn't encourage that at all.
No, we don't. But they do.
Yeah.
But they do. Yeah.
And again, at undergraduate, that might be less of an issue, but we have seen questions about this in politics and things, about supplying students with different kind of IT equipment, because essentially, if that is a Chinese student and they are doing something that is in any way critical of the Chinese government, that's probably going to be tracked if they're using certain bits of this software. So again, in terms of their security and their personal data and what they're putting in. But again, if they're using sensitive information for research, if confidential business data or anything like that, we don't really want them putting it into that. We wouldn't want them putting it into ChatGPT or anything either, but because we have these tools where we know we have these data agreements in place, we know those to be secure and safe, and that is not putting them at risk. Anything where it can in some way cause them to be reported back to the government, That's going to be a problem. We do know they're using it, but again, it's a conversation to have, particularly with, I think, research students. Any more for any more? Yeah.
I guess in terms of accessibility, if you're allowing them to use AI as part of their assessment, is it helpful then to ensure that there is some session where you're going through all of this, rather than saying, go forward and use AI, here's the general parameters? Would you recommend instead, like you're doing, okay, here's some things to think about in terms of writing, to have a sort of similar thing about giving everyone a basis for how to use AI in a responsible, critical way?
Absolutely. I think essentially that we're heading towards this kind of thing being stuff that we should be thinking about as academic skills, about how you're using it critically, the things that we would teach about critical assessment of resources. It's kind of the same, but a little bit different with the application. But if I'm searching a database and some papers come up, who sponsored them, who's written them, all that kind of thing, or what's this coming up with, do I trust it? And being able to link back in articles and look for kind of decisions as well. I think also trying to get people to avoid over-dependence on it. So there was a recent Microsoft study where it looks at critical thinking and use of AI, and people who are heavily dependent on it tend to think less critically, which unfortunately is more problematic because they're less likely to critically interrogate what it's giving back to them. I think a lot of it is about what decisions are you giving away, for me. And this is a huge thing as a disabled person, in that there's the whole campaign of nothing about us without us. And a lot of us have had decisions taken away from us in our lives, and we want decisions. So I am more than happy to have something help me and facilitate stuff so I can dictate or whatever. But if it's telling me, read this article, not that one, or read this bit, or this is what that article said, I don't know. I want to make that decision. I don't want to give up decisions. So it depends what decisions you're giving up, essentially, I think is a good way of thinking about it critically, is that am I choosing these things? Is it facilitating or is it deciding? For me, is a big question. But I think not in a huge way, but just trying to make them aware of this. And because I think the automation bias is really strong with so many people, that particularly if you lack a bit of confidence, if you're new to a subject, the computer will know better. It will pull out the right article for me. It will summarize this article better than I can. That's not necessarily the case. So I think sort of trying to challenge some of those assumptions and making them aware of the biases there is a really important thing to do. Yeah.
Will there be potentially any causes of actually teaching students confidence in their own work in comparison to AI? Because again, that sounds like a big skill issue. It's more the confidence in your own work and the ability to then kind of say, could that be something which could be offered more centrally as well as a signposting for students to kind of join in? Or because maybe not every lecture and every subject area is equally confident in doing that.
I think that's a really interesting one, and it's something that I found interesting in doing some stuff with postgrads, that they've wanted this, and it's kind of, well, actually, if I got a computer to pick something and I got you to pick something on the topic that you're writing about, I would trust you over the AI. They're not necessarily comfortable with this. I think one area where this has been interesting is a training session that colleagues in digital skills team run for BRIC, which is around AI summarising your research for you. And one of the things that shows very quickly is that it doesn't do it very well. So if you're trying to write an abstract or kind of a summary for a conference, or trying to just publicise your research, and you get AI to do it, what it very, very quickly demonstrates to students is it's not doing it very well. It's not representing it as the way you want to represent it. So again, it's potentially using it as that starting point, but actually going, you're the person who understands your research. You are capable of more nuance than this is. And what you want to tell people isn't necessarily what it thinks it should tell people. So that, I think, is a good, certainly for postgrads, that's a session run through BRIC, and I think that's a really good one for getting students to understand what it can and can't do, and feeling more confident in their own decision making.
Yeah, the reason why I'm mentioning it is because we have a speaker end of this month. She's coming from King's, and she has actually done it. She had a psychologist in the class, and obviously we can't do that. But she actually had a psychologist come to class to first of all teach students their confidence to find their voice in this session, and then introduce to what level they could use AI. She will be talking about that topic. So it might be interesting to see how we can maybe because she's now her funding has been cut for it as well. So it'll be interesting to see how maybe more shoestring version might work with something we can do to combine the two.
Being blunt, anything we were doing is probably going to be a shoestring version at the moment. It's an interesting area, and I think I think a lot of this is that automation bias about knowing And I think a confidence about digital tools, about knowing what shortcuts, again, about knowing the terrain, what shortcuts can I take and what are going to be risky. So yeah, I think that kind of thing would be really interesting to look at, and I think particularly for postgrads, because that seems to be an area where that independent research, but sometimes that lack of confidence is. Just aware of time, so I think thank you very much for having me, and I shall pass across to Ben.
Copyright. So yeah, I'll try to, I think first of all, provide a bit of context just so we're all on the same page when we talk about copyright and about copyright at the university. I'll say what I always say first of all, which is that I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in the legal team, this isn't legal advice. I just work in the library, so we do our best to provide guidance. And yeah, so first of all, just copyright, a form of intellectual property applying to certain sort of tangible works. So ideas themselves aren't copyrightable; they have to be expressed in a specific form in order to be subject to copyright protection. What is that? It's the exclusive right that creators have to do certain things with their work, restricted acts. So copying, adapting, communicating their work to the public. And the author or the creator of the work owns the copyright in the first instance, but they might be required to transfer that to, for example, an employer such as the university, also a publisher if you're publishing your work. Copyright doesn't last forever. Usually we're talking the life of the creator plus 70 years, but it varies for different types of works. And we have legislation, so specific to the UK, the legislation is in the Copyright Designs and Patents Act, which has in it exceptions which cover certain activities, including activities that we engage with here at the university. And I'll come back to that in the context of AI specifically in a few slides. There we go. And a sort of York-specific bit of context. So you may or may not have seen this in Staff Digest last week, but the university's intellectual property regulations were actually updated and revised last week by the legal team. They don't say anything new, they don't change anything, but they do help clarify exactly what, in terms of staff and students, what we own, where the university claims ownership of those materials. I think it's worth including this just for context, and if you are putting material into a generative AI tool, you need to know who owns the rights to it. So generally speaking, students will own the material they create whilst they're at the university. Exceptions apply, for example, if they're working in collaboration with staff, and if that member of staff has had the most input into that work. But yeah, the university does actually own the intellectual property rights that its staff create, with these exceptions. So we've got scholarly outputs, teaching materials, so you still own that material that you're creating for teaching in the context of a classroom-based course. There's some room for interpretation there, maybe. And yeah, artistic works, teaching and training materials. So yeah, the university has a say in what we do, what we retain ownership of as members of staff here at York. So university guidance. So the university does have guidance when it comes to copyright and AI, and you might have already seen this. It varies depending on where you look. So I think the overriding position statement is this IT services guidance on generative AI tools, which says you must not upload any copyrighted content including journals, specifically, for some reason, to any Gen AI tools unless you've confirmed this is acceptable with the publisher. So that's quite a risk-averse sort of take on it, I'd say. There's also guidance for staff, generative AI guidance for staff and for taught students. Both those pages say, avoid uploading personal, sensitive or copyrighted material to generative AI. And then student guidance on use of AI in assessment also has some warnings there around intellectual property. So including copyright in there. There's also guidance for researchers and for PGRs, which currently it says it's pretty much the same message. So that sort of risk-averse position. Why does the university take that position? Well, there are lots of considerations to bear in mind when it comes to AI and copyright and how these two things intersect. I've taken these questions from a paper from a colleague, Andrew Johnson, who works at the library at University of Sheffield. He wrote this paper that really goes into quite a bit of detail. I won't go into this much detail in this session, but just the general questions. So does the AI, and here I'd say, generative AI tools, does the AI make copies of any copyrighted works used to train it? So the fact is that these tools that we're using, they only function because they've been fed these vast training data sets. Those training data sets are made up of material that's being created by human authors. Chances are a lot of that material will be subject to copyright. How does it get that training material? It could just be indiscriminate scraping the web for any material that's openly available to view, in which case, it might not care too much about copyright considerations. It could be that a publisher has signed a specific agreement with an AI developer to give them their content for training. That's quite a lucrative business at the moment. We see lots of publishers signing up with these agreements and asking their authors to sign these agreements specifically to opt in to have their work used for training AI models. And also, of course, you've got user prompts, user inputs, the things that we put into these systems to train them. So Richard's already talked about how at the university we have our supported tools. We have Gemini principally, but then also Copilot and Notebook LM. And we have some assurance there that the material inputs are not being used to train the wider model. But definitely in the case of any other tools, sometimes you might get the option to opt out of having your data used for training. That might not always be the case. So anything, if you're putting material into an AI tool, a generative AI tool, then it could be copied and used for the purpose of training the underlying model. And that's where the copying becomes an issue. The other consideration here, so if it's creating copies of that material that is used for training, then does the AI tool create outputs that are copies of that material? So this comes down to whether it's whether the outputs that it's producing are infringing copyright by substantially duplicating what's been put into them. This is one of many grey areas, and AI proponents would certainly argue that that's not the case, that actually what these tools are doing is they're producing brand new creative works, yeah, but I guess it also depends on what you're asking the AI tool to do. Your prompt could be leading it to create something that's infringing. If you say, create a copy of this, or create something in the style of this existing work, then potentially you're creating an output which is infringing copyright. Does the AI further communicate any copies of copyright works? So again, this comes back to the fact that we have our supported tools at the university, where the things we put into them aren't being used to train the wider model. So they shouldn't then be further communicated in that sense. And of course, as Alice has already talked about, issues of attribution and citation. Does the AI attribute the works used to train it? It's a known issue that AI tools, they're not great when it comes to offering citations or citing their sources correctly, and they can hallucinate citations, they can misrepresent citations, and I know that Gemini, at least, it tries to provide sources where it's producing like direct quotes, or where there are specific sources that it can cite. But there's so much material in these training data sets. Is it even realistic to expect these tools to be able to attribute all the works that have been used to train it? It's whether there's the viewpoint that they're engaging in, they're learning, and they're reproducing this material. There's definitely emerging legislation and practice in this area, which is encouraging developers to share more information about what is actually in their training data sets, or at least what the training data sets are that they're using. I think developers and tools are notoriously not transparent when it comes to revealing that, because these are commercial companies. At the end of the day, they don't want to reveal all of their secrets behind how their products work. Just some further considerations. So the prompts, the actual things you're asking these tools to do, are they copyrightable? I think the consensus is probably not. They're not, original, creative enough works to deserve that sort of copyright protection. But again, it's a whole legal grey area. And then also, is there a lower risk associated when it comes to openly licensed and public domain materials? In Andrew's paper, he definitely thinks that that's the case. I think there are questions around, for example, if you're using an open access journal articles, they're free to use, they're free to reuse, often under the terms of a Creative Commons license, but they're not without restrictions, they're still subject to copyright. Even though they're openly licensed, you still have to attribute them. There may be other restrictions on things like commercial use, how those materials can be used. It's not a free-for-all in terms of material that can be just put into a generative AI tool. Public domain, slightly different. Public domain is where copyright has expired in the material, or it was never subject to copyright in the first place, or copyright has been waived by the rights holder. So there's certainly lower risk involved there, but it's still good practice to attribute your sources and so on, and AI tools are not good when it comes to attribution.
Ben, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
If it's right, it doesn't matter the slides. So if we're using AI to do, I don't know, a teaching plan or something more detailed than that, do we worry about copyright, or is it just it's just fine?
A teaching plan.
Or any, or helping with formative assessments, or writing any material, I guess, for teaching.
So that's whether it's whether the prompt that you're giving the tool is copyrightable. You would be the would you be the copyright owner? There isn't a clear answer to that, is there? It's I mean, yeah, as long as if you're just using it and you're not putting any sensitive or personal, that's the other issue. If you shouldn't put any sort of sensitive or personal information into these tools. From a copyright sense, I guess you could argue that your teaching plan is your copyrighted material, or maybe that belongs to the university, and then technically under the position statement from IT services, yeah, technically you shouldn't be doing that. But that's where that position statement is, quite unhelpful in the terms of how broad it is. So,
it's university owned, which it would be in the context you're describing. It's perfectly fine to put it into AI. It's when you're taking third-party stuff.
Right. Okay.
That's where you're crossing the line, I think.
Yeah, I assume you mean it's your own material. It's not. You're not including. It's not other people's copyrighted material. It's not third-party material.
Just usually, day-to-day saying, please do this. I'm preparing a class. Can you give me some? Can you design? And that's just
yeah. No. It's there's no clear answers. It's rather this is where sort of having good practice guidance, I think, is probably useful. Case studies on how it is being used by teaching staff, but by other people, and what is and what isn't okay. I mean, certainly zero risk in terms of copyright by the sounds of it. Yeah. With any other questions at that point, I'll press on. So, as asked.
There's a question actually in the chat.
Okay, sure.
Do we know if work uploaded onto the VLE module sites is used for training AI? I can answer that one. It's not, because we've got a special agreement under Anthology which guarantees that any input from is not used for third parties. So absolutely not is the answer to that.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I was asked. I think, Caroline, you asked about addressing the legal framework around AI tools, generative AI. I guess the answer is there is no legal framework as such at the moment. What we do have is the UK CDPA, Copyright Designs and Patents Act, which hasn't been. Well, there are exceptions there, but they came in over 10 years ago. So really we're looking at quite outdated legislation and trying to apply that to this new and transformative technology. And the UK legislation is also, it's out of step with, for example, US legislation, where there's a much broader or much more liberal interpretation of what you can do when it comes to AI and copyrighted material. So they have this concept of fair use, not fair dealing. We have fair dealing. It is fair dealing in the US. Basically, where there's a lot more freedom to use that material. So there's a question about whether do AI tools are they even copying in a traditional sense or in a legal sense? I think, as I've said before, I think developers would argue that that's not what they're doing. They're looking at material, they're learning from it. They're not creating copies. That's not quite been worked out in the courts yet. I think under the UK legislation, AI tools may indeed infringe the rights of copyright owners, because what they're doing is disseminating that work to the public without copying or disseminating without full authorization from rights holders. So I think, consensus is that, at the moment, copyright definitely is an issue when it comes to AI. I talked about these legal exceptions that we have, which came in 2014, most of these. So a key one here, research and private study, illustration for instruction. So these educational use exceptions are there. So these depend on, again, it's providing full and proper attribution to your sources and so on. But how these apply when it comes to using AI tools is another question. There's this text and data mining exception. So that's the computational analysis of materials. That's specifically for non-commercial research purposes. But that does have an application, I think, when it comes to generative AI, putting material into Gen AI tools for them to be analysed. Another exception that allows you to create temporary copies of material for technological processes. So again, another one which could feature. But just to say, the legislation, it doesn't address AI specifically, but it does flag up a whole load of areas where there could be cases of infringement when you're using AI tools. There's also a question about whether those AI outputs are actually copyrightable. And the gut instinct is to say, no, of course not. Copyright should only apply to human creations, things that we create, original works. But actually in the UK legislation, there is a clause that suggests that computer-generated works are in fact subject to copyright, and the copyright owner is the person who made the arrangements possible for that work to exist. Who that is in terms of an AI, is it the developer, is it the user, is it the owner of the material that went into training the AI? It's really unclear. And it sort of contradicts other parts of the legislation. So not helpful. The government are trying to help. So you may have seen this recently in the news because it has, it's received a sort of loud response from certain parts of the creative industries and individual writers and artists who've spoken up about this. So the government, being keen on innovation and sort of catching up with the US specifically, they launched a consultation on copyright and AI. This closed a few weeks ago, end of February. The key objectives, they wanted to make sure that they're supporting rights holders' control of their content and ability to be remunerated for its use, but also supporting the development of world-leading AI models in the UK and promoting greater trust and transparency between the sectors. And their proposal is that it's I was going to say watering down, I don't know if that's correct, but they want to introduce a mechanism so that basically any copyrighted material can be used to train AI without fear of copyright infringement, but then have a mechanism so rights holders can kind of opt out of that. So then the responsibility is on rights holders to reserve their rights. But the way that would be achieved is not clear. The sort of technical solutions are not quite, not really been realised yet. So yeah, the response to this from the creative industries has been that this is a betrayal, because but copyright is there for a reason, and AI developers shouldn't be able to just have free access to all this material. Of course, in practice, I imagine a lot of AI tools are just scraping this material and using it for training, regardless of any copyright concerns. But yeah, this has been a recent development. There's already been suggestions of a partial climb down from this by the government. So yeah, it'll be waiting and see if this brings any kind of recommendations or any clarification or any changes to the law. So just to summarise, I feel like I've not really provided much assurance here or any clear answers, but that's because there aren't any at the moment. I mean, other than to say that the university guidance is there. The university guidance says avoid uploading copyrighted material to Gen AI tools without permission or those assurances. But below that, you can weigh up the risks and the benefits that are involved here. There are those legal exceptions. There are there are ways of using material that's less, where there's less risk involved when it comes to open access, Creative Commons licensed material, public domain material. But the library's here, and we're happy to talk about this and to give guidance, and we're developing more guidance on this because we think it's really necessary to do so. But yeah, the legal questions are still there, not really addressed by the current legislation, but court decisions, recommendations from that government consultation might bring about some regulatory changes and some clarity in due course, but probably no time soon. But we'll see. That's it for me. I did have sort of conversation prompts, but just aware of time. I don't know if we want to.
In the chat, actually, which is a really good one.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, Reba was asking, so Reba has published a book with Routledge, but they recently sold a lot of material to Microsoft to train their AI, and she is it going to continue to be like that? Do we have no power over what's going to happen to our outputs if we publish with someone, or is there some help in the university to support staff who don't actually want AI to be trained on their publications?
It's interesting to hear from authors who've actually.
I hope the summary was okay, Reba.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear from authors who from staff who have. I guess they've been notified at least by the publisher that this is happening. Some publishers, like Cambridge University Press, they've gone with an opt-in approach. So they've contacted authors individually and said, sign this to agree so we can do this. By the sounds of it, Routledge have just opted everyone in. I don't know if there's an opt-out process. She'd have to check. She'd have to check the contracts that she signed and so on. I mean, if she has signed a contract that assigns her copyright to that publisher, then there's not a lot that she can probably do in that case. But yeah, it's interesting to hear about cases like that. And she can email the library and we can have more of a discussion about that if she wants.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is there any more? Not on copyright specifically. Should I skip straight to the end, Richard? Or
Yeah, well, just the last one.
The last slide here.
That one, the next one. That one,
Okay, so yeah, I think just further discussion prompts, just for the last bit of the workshop. I think just thinking about what the key challenges might be when it comes to using AI tools in your teaching context, if that's the context that you're in, and yeah, what are the well, we know we've already addressed the unresolved issues, but yeah.
Just one question. So I know that on my program there's a module where they're allowing AI usage for the assessment to a certain level, and it's being discussed in the classroom. And I know that the students are all signed a timetable to attend one of the university organized prompting sessions, and also signposted towards which software to use. So it's the university official, and they're being shown how to do that. My question is just, will these prompting sessions potentially happen at the beginning of each semester? Meaning that when we have different cohorts starting at different times, instead of a tutor having to learn this, because not everyone knows the basics of prompting or how it developed, if we have a central, this is a hybrid event, there are so many face-to-face seats, everyone else can join online, and at the beginning of each semester, module leaders just know this is the session we can timetable for the students to then signpost them to learn the basics around prompting if they allow AI usage as part of their assessment, to cover the basics of how that works. They would still then themselves have to teach a bit further about, or the program itself needs to integrate the critical engagement with it, but at least having that, is that something you guys are working towards? Do you have money for that to actually do that? Or?
I think that's probably a conversation with the digital and academic skills team, who are also working with faculty and liaison librarians on that. At the moment, I don't know how frequently they are scheduled. I think Tristan from the Academic Writing Centre has been involved with some of the AI prompting within courses in the department. So I think if it's something that's going to become more widespread, we're happier generally running central sessions rather than having to timetable ones for each department. So yeah, and again, I think that's probably a conversation for them, because to be honest, we're still learning from semesterisation, because before we had a really strong idea of what the academic year looked like, and we schedule stuff now, it's fine for those exams. We've lost that. But if you know that if we run it every week, whatever, there'll be a big audience of students who want to go to that, and that's the conversation to have with them, because we're always happy to take input. We try and put training on when it works for people, but at the moment we've really lost a lot of that calendar.
Could you send us some contacts to Caroline so she can share it afterwards as part of, with the recording and everything, we can then share. If you have questions around training for prompting or something, people can then contact you.
Would that be you?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just put Martin on the spot.
Yeah, so the three AI sessions that we kind of in the library, between different teams, we've done them twice, so in the autumn semester and this semester, just as a three. They're standalone, but you can go to all three.
Yeah, no, because I think we're running these workshops in a couple of weeks where we want modules to think about a lot more for the next academic year, and program leaders as well, to how these skills are being sifted through. Yeah. So then people have a potentially better idea, hopefully, or a clearer idea, at least hopefully in this faculty or school, to then kind of say, this is the time where it would work quite well for some of our modules. And then they could at least reach out and kind of say, this is how many students we have, or at least if there is initially some recorded material they have to watch, although that's always harder to reinforce than having at least a hybrid event where you can ask questions.
We'll make sure, we'll have a chat internally and then send you.
If you come to us in person, we can have a chat in the office around it, but I don't
it's planning, and it's just whether we have to do more sessions or just time put them at the right times.
Yeah. So I think the longer the lead time, for when you want these sessions run, the better. So because obviously with all the resourcing issues we're facing at the moment.
Hence a question.
Yeah, I mean, if you email in now, we can certainly look at doing this the next year. So as long as this isn't something you want in the next couple of weeks.
No.
I think the other communities that are there unresolved issues relating to EDI, copyright. I think someone, you touched on it, if we could start seeing some cases about positive impacts on EDI. I know some colleagues, for example, have used AI to summarise lectures or support where students haven't been able to come quite quickly, been able to give them a summary of what's being covered rather than having to write notes up yourself, things, and supporting synopsis. There's quite a lot of, that's one example, but there's many examples of where AI has supported students positively. I think it would be good to start sharing some more stories where possible.
We definitely need case studies. So this is something that came up in the University AI steering group in terms of how we promote this and put the accent on enabling positive lessons learned. So if you know use cases, get in touch, and certainly my team, the digital education team, will be very keen to sort of publicise these. And we're also really interested in staff who are starting to use the AI design assistant tools within Blackboard. So if that's of interest, get in touch. Claire Sinclair's, we've already got a case study around what she's been doing with business planning, her module there, but we'd like to do more of that.
Mm-hmm. Again, if we can put that in the email again, that would be really good, just to kind of have that together for people who might not be able to kind of attend today.
We have to go. So thank you. Like I said, any other questions before we finish?
Go to the last slide. Just
Yeah, we're quite happy to be emailed because we realise it's a big old topic.
So we do, so I just put in there's a link there to our AI practical guide, and which sort of indexes the other guidance we have on generative AI specifically. And also there's a copyright practical guide, but it needs to address AI more specifically. So yeah, working on that one.
Thank you, Richard, Alice and Ben, for putting this together and putting something together just for us, I guess, because it's not been done across the school, across the university before. So we really do appreciate your time. So thank you very much.